My name is Emma. I'm 33, and I live in a small city in Poland. I started learning English in school like everyone else. We learned grammar rules, filled in exercises, and repeated vocabulary lists. I got good grades, but the truth is, I couldn't speak English at all. Whenever I tried, my mind went completely blank. I knew the words, but I couldn't use them. I always had to translate from Polish in my head, and by the time I was time the right English words, the moment had already passed. It felt impossible. I thought, maybe English is just not for me. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was watching videos on my phone, and I came across a woman who said, "You don't need perfect grammar. You need to think in English." I paused the video and replayed that sentence again and again. Think in English? I whispered to myself. I had never tried that. I always translated. Maybe that was my biggest problem. My brain was still working in Polish. From that moment, I decided to try a new experiment. I would train my brain to think in English. The next morning, I got up and decided to think in English. I looked around and said in my mind, "This is my bed. I feel tired. I want coffee." They were very simple sentences, but for the first time, I didn't translate. I just said what I saw and felt. It was strange and slow at first, but I liked it. On my way to the kitchen, I continued. The window is open. The air is cold. The cat is sleeping. I was surprised by how many simple things I could already say in English if I just focused. Later that day, I tried something new. I walked around the house and spoke out loud to myself in English. I described everything I did. Now I'm washing the dishes. This plate is dirty. The water is hot. At first, I felt a little silly, like I was pretending to be in a movie. But slowly, I started enjoying it. It felt like I was practicing speaking without pressure, without anyone correcting me or judging me. It was just me and my voice. My cat looked at me like I was crazy, but I kept going. I turned my daily routines into English practice. When I made tea, I said, "I'm boiling water. I'm adding a tea bag. I'm waiting." When I walked outside, I thought, "The sun is shining. I see a dog. The leaves are green." These were simple thoughts, but I noticed something amazing. My brain was starting to switch naturally into English for small things. I didn't have to translate all the time anymore. I was still far from fluent, but I could already feel the change. My brain was learning a new path. After 2 weeks of thinking in English every day, something incredible happened. I had a dream, and it was completely in English. I was in a shop, talking to someone. I don't remember exactly what we said, but I know I wasn't translating. I was just talking. I woke up smiling. It felt like a small miracle. My brain was starting to trust English, and that gave me even more motivation to continue. I wanted to train my brain more. I wanted to live inside the English language. I looked around my apartment and realized everything was in Polish. So I decided to change my environment. I put sticky notes with English words on everything: mirror, refrigerator, light switch, door. Every time I touched something, I read the English word. I also changed my phone and social media into English. Suddenly, I was surrounded by the language. I wasn't just studying English anymore, I was living with it. It wasn't always easy, but it made my brain stay in English mode more often. I started using every moment of my day to think in English. Even in the shower, I practiced. I told myself stories, described my day, or made plans out loud. I said, after this, I will go to the store. I will buy eggs. I will cook something nice. It became like a game. The more I practiced, the faster the words came. Sometimes I didn't know a word, so I explained it in other ways. For example, if I forgot umbrella, I said, the thing you use when it rains. That also helped my brain grow stronger in English. One of the biggest changes came when I stopped being afraid of mistakes. In the past, I waited until I had the perfect sentence. Now, I spoke with what I had. If I didn't know the correct word, I used a simpler one. If I used the wrong tense, I didn't panic. I just moved on. My goal was not to be perfect, it was to keep thinking and speaking in English. That changed everything. I stopped freezing, I stopped overthinking, I finally started feeling free to use the language, even with mistakes. One evening, I stood in front of my mirror and talked to myself in English. I asked myself questions. How was your day, Emma? What did you do? And then I answered. It was a good day. I worked, I cooked dinner, I watched a movie. I looked myself in the eyes and practiced saying longer sentences. It felt powerful. I wasn't waiting for a teacher or a class. I was training myself. My brain was becoming my best teacher. I was learning how to think, speak, and live in English, one day at a time. A few days later, I decided to go for a walk in the park near my home. But instead of listening to music, I used that time to think in English. As I walked, I described everything I saw in my mind. There is a man jogging with his dog. The trees are moving in the wind. I can hear children playing near the swings. I noticed that when I moved my body, my thoughts flowed more easily. The combination of walking and thinking in English made me feel more relaxed, and I started to enjoy this little routine very much. One thing that still bothered me was how slow I was. Even though I could form sentences in English, they came much more slowly than in Polish. I wanted to think faster, so I decided to push myself a little more. I gave myself a challenge. I would try to describe 5 things around me without stopping or translating. At first, it was difficult. I paused, corrected myself, and sometimes forgot simple words. But every time I tried again, it got easier. My brain was learning to connect thoughts and words more quickly. I realized I didn't have to wait for real situations to practice. I could create imaginary situations in my head and speak about them in English. So I started making up small stories while I cleaned or walked. For example, I imagined I was in a cafe in London ordering a coffee. Hi, I'd like a cappuccino, please. Yes, to go. Thank you very much. I acted it out like it was real. Sometimes I imagined job interviews or phone calls or meeting new people. It felt like playing, but it was also real brain training. After almost a month of thinking in English every day, I got a message from an old friend. He had moved to Canada and he was visiting our city for a few days. He said we should meet for coffee, and he asked if we could speak in English. I felt nervous, but I said yes. When we met, I was surprised by how much I could actually say. I didn't freeze. I didn't need to translate every word. I just talked. I still made mistakes, but I didn't care. I was able to follow the conversation and express my ideas. It felt like a victory. After that meeting, something changed in me. I felt more confident. I realized that thinking in English had trained me to speak without panic. I was no longer translating in my head. I was just thinking and answering directly in English, like I had practiced. It felt so natural. I told myself that even if I never became perfect, I had already crossed the most important line. I was no longer afraid. That confidence gave me more energy to keep going and to make English a part of my daily life in everything I did. To keep improving, I also changed the way I watched TV and movies. I stopped using Polish subtitles. At first, I watched with English subtitles so I could understand more. But later, I turned off all subtitles and just listened. I didn't understand everything, but I focused on the tone, the expressions, and the rhythm of the language. After watching, I would try to repeat some of the lines I remembered. I practiced saying them in front of the mirror. It helped me a lot with speaking naturally and thinking faster in English. I made a new habit. Every morning, I set small English goals for the day. For example, one day my goal was to describe everything I ate in English. Another day, I focused on using new verbs or expressions I had learned. These small goals made my brain stay active, and they made English fun again. I didn't feel like I was studying for a test. I was just using English as a tool for thinking and living. It became something natural, not something stressful or boring. One evening, I sat quietly and imagined my future self. I pictured myself speaking English fluently, traveling to other countries, and making international friends. I had a full conversation in my mind, pretending I was already that version of me. I asked myself questions like, "How did you learn English so well?" and answered, "I trained my brain every single day." I thought in English even when no one was watching. That simple imagination gave me strength. It reminded me why I was doing this. I was building the person I wanted to be. Thinking in English also taught me to be braver in general. I used to avoid situations where I had to speak English, but now I started looking for them. I went to events where foreigners came together, and even though I was nervous, I started conversations. I smiled, made mistakes, laughed, and kept speaking. I knew that every mistake was a step forward. Every time I spoke without fear, my brain became stronger. I was training it like a muscle, and it was getting better every single week. One morning, about 2 months after I started this journey, I looked at myself in the mirror and said, "Emma, you are not the same person anymore." And it was true. I wasn't just learning English. I was becoming someone new, someone more confident, more open, and more curious. My brain was still learning, but it was working in a different way now. I no longer needed to fight with the language. I was starting to live in it. And that, I realized, was the real power of thinking in English. Before I started thinking in English, every mistake felt like a failure. I felt ashamed when I forgot a word or used the wrong tense. But now I saw mistakes differently. I started to see them as signs that I was trying. Every mistake meant that I was pushing my brain to do something new. It meant that I was using English in real life, not just studying it in a book. I told myself, mistakes are my teachers, not my enemies. This mindset helped me feel calmer and more patient with myself. One morning, as I was brushing my teeth, something funny happened. My brain started talking to me in English without me asking it to. It said, "You're going to be late if you don't hurry up." I laughed. I hadn't planned to think in English at that moment, but it just happened. That's when I understood something important. My brain had started to accept English as a second voice. It wasn't a visitor anymore. It was becoming a permanent guest. That moment gave me a strange but wonderful feeling of pride. At the beginning, thinking in English felt like a job. I had to remind myself to do it. I had to stop, focus, and push through my doubts. But now, after so many weeks, it had turned into a habit. I no longer had to force it. When I cooked, I thought in English. When I went to the store, I repeated the names of things in English in my head. When I was alone, I had full conversations with myself in English without planning it. My brain was doing it on its own. And that showed me how powerful habits can be. One evening, I sat on my balcony, drinking tea and thinking about the day. And I realized something beautiful. English didn't feel like a foreign language anymore. It felt like a friend who was always with me. This friend helped me see the world differently. It gave me access to books, podcasts, people, and ideas I had never understood before. I felt like English had opened a new door in my life, and behind that door was a whole new version of me, more connected, more open, and more free. A few days later, something special happened. I was in a bookstore looking at English novels when a woman next to me asked, "Have you read this one?" She was from Australia. Without thinking, I answered, "No, but I've heard it's good." We started talking, and soon we were chatting like old friends. I didn't stop to translate, I just spoke. I listened, I understood. We talked for nearly 20 minutes. And when she left, she said, "Your English is really natural." I couldn't stop smiling. That small moment felt like a giant step forward. To continue training my brain, I also started journaling in English. Every night before bed, I wrote one full page about my day, my feelings, or my dreams. I didn't worry about grammar or spelling, I just wrote honestly. This helped me think more deeply in English. I was no longer just naming objects or giving simple answers. I was expressing my thoughts, my emotions, and my experiences in a second language. It felt like building a bridge between my heart and the English words I was learning. One morning, I woke up with a sore throat and a high fever. I booked an online consultation with a doctor who only spoke English. A few months ago, this situation would have terrified me. But now, I explained my symptoms clearly. I have a headache, sore throat, and chills. It started yesterday. The doctor asked questions, and I understood everything. I didn't panic. I used simple words, but I spoke with confidence. After the call, I realized that thinking in English had prepared me for real life. I could now handle important situations on my own. As my confidence grew, I started sharing my experience online. I wrote a post in English on a language learning forum explaining how thinking in English changed everything for me. I received so many comments from people around the world who were trying to do the same. Some thanked me, some asked for tips. I answered everyone, and it made me feel proud. I wasn't just learning for myself anymore. I was becoming part of a global community. And that made me love English even more. Now, when I look back, I see clearly the biggest change didn't come from books or teachers. It came from inside my own brain. By teaching my brain to think in English, I had changed the way I use the language. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to keep going, every single day. I used everyday moments as opportunities. I accepted mistakes. I celebrated small wins. And in doing so, I discovered something powerful. My brain is not a limit. It's a tool, and I can train it to do anything. I still have a lot to learn. I still forget words, make grammar mistakes, and get nervous in big conversations. But now I know how to keep improving. I know that by thinking in English, I can turn every hour into a chance to grow. I don't need to wait for a teacher or a classroom. I am the classroom. My life is the lesson. And English is not just something I study, it's something I live. This is not the end of my story. This is only the beginning of a new way of being. And I'm ready for it.